Coming up on today's program, ESPN gave their season-long predictions, and they were pretty harsh on the Houston Texans based on how they performed last year. They won a playoff game. They made it to the divisional round, lost a close one to the Kansas City Chiefs, yet ESPN ranked them in their power rankings as the 14th best team in the NFL. I'll break down what that ESPN article said. They have a couple different points that they talk about the Houston Texans about, who the biggest surprise is, who the biggest fantasy guy is, this, that, and the other. We'll break it all down around that ESPN article. But this is why you subscribe to ESPN. $120 a year, and that's just for the base package. Now they have ESPN Unlimited, and I think that one's like $300 a year. Texans today is, hold on one second. Let me check my notes. Yeah, it is free. It's $0 a year. So if you want free Texans content all year long, and if ESPN drops an article on their ESPN Plus or ESPN whatever, I'll still break it down for you. I make sure I pay for those so you don't have to, and I'll just break down everything that ESPN's got to say because also, you don't really have to listen to ESPN because they don't follow the Texans nearly as close as I do, as a lot of the beat reporters and people who are around the team. ESPN, they're just not as close to a couple of the other guys that cover the team. I would say me included. So make sure you don't waste money. All you got to do, hit that subscribe button. All right, ESPN Analytics. This is what they said for the Houston Texans, the 14th best team in their power rankings. Chances to make the playoffs, 54.3%. Chances to win the division, 42.5%. And the strength of schedule, 14th easiest, a tie for the Houston Texans. Now, they gave their ESPN projected wins for each team along the way. And they do have the Texans as the favorite to win the AFC South. 8.8 wins, though, projected by ESPN. The Jags right behind at 8.1. 7.7 for the Colts and 6.7 for the Tennessee Titans. And, 8.8, I guess we can round it up to 9. I see that as the absolute floor for the Houston Texans. I think if the Texans only have 9 wins when it's all said and done, I think that's a worst-case scenario for this team where almost everything goes wrong. The offense doesn't look great. The defense isn't as good as you expected. I think a lot of things have to happen, in my opinion, for the Texans to only garner 9 wins during the 2025 season. That's just my opinion. But ESPN, they're predicting around that 8-9 win mark for this Texans squad. Even though they do have the Texans winning the division, I think that's a little bit of a miscalculation on ESPN's part. So I want to hear from you. What do you think the Texans' floor is for wins? The worst case scenario where the Texans have a really bad season, I think the floor is around 8 or 9. Let me know though down in the comment section. What do you think worst case scenario the floor is for the Houston Texans? And ESPN didn't stop there at all, because Bill Barnwell also put out an article of the teams that could make the playoffs and could maybe miss the playoffs. And he chose 3 teams that made the playoffs last year that he's predicting don't make it this year. Those 3 teams, the Texans, the Rams, and the Bucs. 3 teams that made the playoffs last year, that won their divisions, that he's saying aren't going to win their divisions and aren't going to make the playoffs this season. I think that is a massive miscalculation, once again, by Billy Barnwell. I don't agree with that whatsoever. But let's look at the ESPN predictions and what they had to say. First up, they broke down the biggest strength for the Houston Texans. And not a major surprise here for Texans fans. They said the edge rushers, the defensive line, and most namely Will Anderson Jr. and Danielle Hunter, which I agree, the best pass rush duo in the NFL, if you ask me. Maybe a little bit biased as a Texans fan, but I agree with ESPN that the biggest strength could be this Texans pass rush, because Will Anderson Jr. is on the precipice of being one of the top edge rushers in the entire National Football League. And I don't know if Danielle Hunter found the fountain of youth, but that dude hasn't aged a bit. He looks like he's Benjamin Button gone down since he's been with the Houston Texans. I expect another great year from Danielle Hunter as well. And I agree with ESPN that could be the Texans' biggest strength going into this season. Hell, I even said one of my bold takes, one of my hot takes coming into the year is that by the end of the year, Will Anderson Jr. is going to be the best Texans player on this squad. I stick by that. I think this edge rusher duo is the Texans' biggest strength heading into 2025. Let's look at their biggest concern, though, around the Houston Texans. And it was the offensive line. and maybe some easy picking, some low-hanging fruit. But this is what ESPN had to say on the biggest concern. Most of the starters on the offensive line have struggled throughout their career, or at least recently. Tackle Ariante Ursary looked promising in camp, though he is a rookie, and tackle Titus Howard is proven. But outside of them, the starters could be a few guys who have been cast-offs. So, how will they come together in a pivotal year 3 for Coach DeMeco Ryans? And I did want to say, the biggest concern being the O-line, that's recycled content. That's stuff that they were talking about 2-3 months ago. I feel like this is like a copy and paste situation for a lot of these ESPN guys of, oh yeah, of course, the biggest concern is the offensive line because it's the same biggest concern that we've been talking about for the past 3 or 4 months. And the thing that annoys me the most is the biggest concern should be Joe Mixon and whether or not he suits up for the Houston Texans, the running back. I think that's a big concern because I talked about it. I like Nick Chubb. I think he can be really good for this team. But adding Joe Mixon into that mix with him and Chubb as a 1-2 combo can elevate this Texans offense to another level. And saying the Texans O-line is the biggest concern, of course. Okay, yeah, sure. But I hate the criticism of the Texans offensive line was bad in 2025. All right, they add 3 new starters. All right, well, the Texans have 3 new starters on the offensive line. Okay, you can't have it both ways. You can't say the offensive line was bad and they need to replace guys. And then when the Texans replace guys, you go, well, they have a bunch of new guys. Of course, the offensive line was bad. So they replaced them. Duh. I mean, I get it's the biggest concern and it's an easy talking point for somebody who's maybe not close to the team. But I just think it's an easy, low-hanging fruit that, of course, ESPN is going to mention the offensive line because that's the only thing they know about the Houston Texans, that and their star players. Let's look at another part of this ESPN article, the QB stat to know. And from the biggest concern, you probably know what the QB stat to know is. The sacks in 2024. C.J. Stroud sacked 52 times, second most in the entire National Football League. I think that is going to definitely curve in the right direction for the Texans offense in 2025. They have new OC Nick Caley. They have a new offensive scheme where they're going to try to run the ball a little bit more. Also, Nick Caley, we talked about him and the Shanahan ties. The other ties that he has is to those New England Patriots offenses. And what do you think about when you think of Tom Brady? Getting the ball out. I think C.J. Stroud, they're going to try to get the ball out of his hands quicker. They're going to have to, get more quick hot routes, more underneath, not trying to force the ball deep, not trying to wait back there in the pocket for 4, 5, 6 seconds, but take what the defense gives you. Hit that tight end for a 4 or 5 yard curl route. Hit that, slot receiver on a quick slant route. I think that's going to be a big change that you'll see in this Texans offense and in C.J. Stroud in 2025. I have 2 more parts of this ESPN article to break down coming up right now. But speaking of C.J. Stroud, if you're looking for some C.J. Stroud gear, give me a yeah down in the comment section. You can go to chatsports.com/CJ Stroud. We have the jerseys, obviously, but also the shirts. I was talking in our live chat, Krautsky, she got a C.J. Stroud jersey. Absolutely loved it. They also have C.J. Stroud graphic tees. They have C.J. Stroud baseball jerseys as well. Anything around C.J. Stroud, we got you covered. So if you need something cool to either wear, maybe put in your man cave like this autographed C.J. Stroud picture, go right here. Chatsports.com/CJ Stroud. All of that available right now. Go check it out. I'll have that link in the comment section and description of today's program. All right, ESPN predictions. Let's look at their next part. They went to the fantasy route and how to win your fantasy league. They mentioned somebody who, this has actually been a very sneaky name that a lot of people have mentioned as well. Jaden Higgins, the 2nd round pick out of Iowa State. I think for sure he is somebody who could have a big role in 2025. But if you're asking me, somebody who's been kind of covering this team, watching this team all off season, Jaden Higgins, I agree he's going to be good. But you always have that feast or famine with rookies, right? There's a little bit of growing pains coming into the year. You know who's not getting selected in about 88% of leagues right now? Christian Kirk. Christian Kirk is another good wide receiver who has built a really good rapport with C.J. Stroud. could be a second option as a veteran in this league, has been there, done that. And of course, Jaden Higgins has a very promising career ahead of him. Texans took him with their first selection in this year's draft at pick 34. I just think people need to pump the brakes a little bit, especially if we're talking fantasy. If you want to win your fantasy football league, wait until the very end, the very last round, and take Christian Kirk. I think that could be a better option than reaching on a guy like Jaden Higgins because he's going in the middle rounds. Maybe look at a guy like a Christian Kirk as somebody who you can snag at the very end, and he's going to be somebody who I guarantee you after week 1, week 2 is going to be snatched up on a lot of waiver wires for fantasy football. Now, I play fantasy football. I have multiple teams. I know a lot of y'all play fantasy football. We were talking with producer Casey. He has 3 teams. I want to know, how many Texans do you have on your fantasy football team? Maybe teams. Let me know down in the comment section. Do you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 Texans on your fantasy team? On your fantasy team. Let me know down in the comment section, how many Texans do you have on your fantasy squad? I'm in a couple fantasy leagues, and I will say I'm in one with all my high school buddies. Shout out to Clear Lake, home of the Falcons. I'm in a fantasy league with a lot of those guys, a lot of Texans fans, so they get snatched up pretty quick. I do have a couple Texans on my fantasy team, though. Definitely Kaimi Fairbairn, my guy. Have him for sure. But let me know down in the comment section, how many Texans do you have on your fantasy football teams? Lastly, from this ESPN article, they gave a bold prediction. And I think if you're a Texans fan, you probably won't think this is that bold. Like, this is in my opinion, a mild prediction. If we're talking spice level, a medium prediction. They said Kamari Lassiter is going to be a Pro Bowler this year. And if you watched any of the Texans games last year, if you watched this Texans defense, even hell, if you just watched the playoffs, you probably know number 4 is a damn good football player. And I think, yes, he's due for a big year 2 jump. In my opinion, the only reason he wasn't the best secondary player that was a rookie last year and why everybody's talking about Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean from the Philadelphia Eagles is because they won the Super Bowl and the Texans didn't. If the Texans would have gone farther in the playoffs, every single person and their mother would have said, dude, have you seen that Kamari Lassiter guy, that cornerback opposite of Derek Stingley? He's the truth. And guess what? Even though they didn't make it that far in the playoffs, even though they only made it to the divisional round, that still holds true with Kamari Lassiter. He's an absolute dog. He's an amazing cornerback. And I hope people finally open their eyes to that with Kamari Lassiter. Hell, even his, rookie teammate, Kalen Bullock, there on the back end. I think both those guys are due for big year 2 jumps. ESPN, they put them in the article as their biggest surprise, but if you're a real Texans fan, that should not be a surprise to you whatsoever. Hit me up on Twitter at Jeremy Chugs if you have any more questions, or hey, just want to chop it up around the Houston Texans or the NFL in general. And also, made to the end of today's video, hit that subscribe button. We're going live on Sunday, Texans versus Rams. Be there or be square. Make sure you're subscribed and you turn on your notifications.